In the Bible, the first step in kingdom citizenship was a renunciation of idolatry. Is this still true in the 21st century? Let's talk about that.
Attention, attention. Stay tuned for an incoming transmission.
This is Radio Free Ecclesia, the pirate radio broadcast to the citizens of God's kingdom living in enemy-occupied territory.
In both the Old Testament and the New Testament, the number one commitment of God's people was a complete rejection of idolatry. In fact, everything else that God was looking for from his people was predicated on this particular thing. To worship idols would be to lead God's people into all the other things that God wanted them to reject in favor of him and his ways. Now, modern people might say, idolatry, we don't have a problem with idolatry. We don't have temples. We don't have statues that we bow down to. Idolatry is a thing of the past. But I think the reason people think that we can't have modern idolatry is because they don't understand ancient idolatry. But once you understand why people got into idolatry and how they went about it, it might be easier to see that, in fact, it's possible for modern 21st century people to actually swerve into idolatry. So let's explore ancient idolatry. First, it's important to appreciate the difference between modern religion and ancient religion. Most modern people, especially Westerners, tend to think of religion as something that is personal, that is private, that's something between them and God. Additionally, most modern people think of religion as really a guide to life, as a way of guiding us into the way we ought to live, especially in regard to moral or ethical practices. And religion is a way of giving meaning to our lives and finding our place in the world. In the ancient world, religion functioned very differently for most people. Religion was really primarily a transactional relationship between people and the gods. Now, in one sense, ancient people were very much like modern people. Ancient people wanted to experience conditions in which they could flourish. In fact, most people were just mainly concerned with staying alive, with getting enough food to feed them and their families and their communities, and being protected from their enemies. And they saw the gods as the primary benefactors who would bring this about. And so the people looked to get the gods to look favorably upon them. And so religion was primarily a way of people to enter into a favorable relationship with the gods, so that the gods would give them the conditions they would need to prosper and to flourish, primarily to grow enough food and to experience peace and prosperity. In addition to that, the gods were there to protect them from their enemies, to give them victory in battle, or maybe even to give them safety as they were traveling, like on the high seas. And so people would give offerings to the gods in order to get the gods to bring them the things that they needed for prosperity and peace and security. And this is why Israel was often tempted to pursue the gods of other nations. In many ways, Israel was hedging its bets, even though they had been taught to trust God and God alone for these things, for flourishing and prosperity and for peace and security. They were often tempted to look to other gods and offer up sacrifices to them and worship them in order to bring about these conditions. When we think of idol worship, it probably conjures up images of people bringing animals to temples where they would be slaughtered and then offered up on an altar and burned up. And that's true, but it doesn't really tell the full story. Yes, people would bring animals to the temples, but usually it was for the purpose of showing devotion to the gods by bringing them gifts. The animals or other things like grain or bread or wine were brought to show the gods your devotion, your allegiance to them, your loyalty to them. Because people thought that the gods wanted to be fed and taken care of. And so the gods, when they saw these gifts brought, people hoped would respond by showing favor to the people. But it wasn't just about bringing gifts of food or other things like that. People would often have parades. Cities would have parades to the gods. For example, the city of Ephesus was primarily the home to the temple to the goddess Artemis or Diana. The Ephesians believed that she was the patron goddess of their city, that she even was the founder of their city. And they believed that all of their prosperity was because of her benevolence to them. And so the city wanted to maintain a good relationship with her. So they would have parades that would go through the city, and people would celebrate the goddess and declare how much they loved her. They would do things to defend her honor and to celebrate her and give her prestige among the other cities. Because again, they wanted to communicate to that goddess that they were loyal citizens of her city. And people would also sing songs and hymns to the gods, once again, to promote their loyalty and their allegiance to them and to celebrate them and to honor them. People would even have feasts in their homes that would be dedicated to celebrating these gods. And again, all of these things were meant to show the gods that the people were loyal to them, that they were giving their allegiance to them. And people believed that the gods were looking for this and wanted this. And that if they would do it, if they would do these kinds of things, bring them gifts, that the gods would recognize that and bless that. And one of the things that people really emphasized was the importance of gratitude. If the gods felt offended because the people were not showing the proper gratitude to them for all the wonderful things that they had done, the gods might pull back all their benevolent acts and their goodwill, and the people would suffer some sort of calamity. And so the populations of cities or other larger regions would come together to celebrate their gods in order to bring this about. And this is why often people who wouldn't participate would face serious ramifications from the citizens in that town. People were afraid that if anybody would dissent from that kind of show of gratitude, that it would look poorly upon their city or their region, and it would turn the gods away. And this also helps explain why in the ancient world, rulers were often revered as gods. To modern people, that just sounds so strange. But in the ancient world, people looked to their rulers, people like pharaohs or Caesars or other rulers, as the people who brought about the conditions in which they would flourish. Their rulers were the ones who protected them from their enemies and created the conditions in which people could experience all the goodness that they needed to experience. And in fact, the rulers were often saw as the high priests who mediated between the people and the gods. Caesar was called the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of the empire. He was the one who made sure that all the benevolence came from the gods to the people. And so this is why even rulers were often celebrated in this way, and why people would pledge their allegiance and their loyalty to not only the gods, but to human rulers as well. Hopefully, as you've been listening, you've already begun to get a sense of how we might fall into idolatry today. You see, any person or institution that you give your loyalty, your allegiance to, is an idol. It can be a political institution or a political leader. It could be a celebrity or other powerful person or powerful institution in our world. But anyone or anything that gets our allegiance, our loyalty, is an idol. Where are we looking for the promise of creating conditions in which we can flourish? Who are we looking to, or what are we looking to create those kinds of conditions? Who or what are we looking to protect us from our enemies and to keep us safe? Who or what are we looking to for peace and security and prosperity and salvation? If we're looking to any human being or any human institution, we're looking at something that is a competitor to God. And so all I want to do is to encourage you to really stop and think about where your loyalties and where your allegiances lie, where you're looking for peace and prosperity and security. Do you give your allegiance and your loyalty to God alone? Or are you, like Israel did sometimes, hedging your bets and looking for others besides God for these things? Citizenship in God's kingdom is an exclusive loyalty, an exclusive allegiance to God and God alone through His Son, Jesus. For us, there is only one God and only one Lord.